In today's Farm Report, with the upcoming harvest season, grain bin rescue training is becoming crucial for first responders. A growing number of mobile grain bin entrapment and rescue simulators help personnel nationwide learn what to do in such of an emergency. Rod Bain with the U.S. Department of Agriculture has more.
Deaths nationwide attributed to grain bin engulfment reached a peak in 2010, but has declined since, thanks largely to efforts by farm and extension experts to train local fire and emergency personnel in rescue procedures.
In the rural communities, that's probably going to be a volunteer fire department, and they certainly need to have some training in order to safely do that rescue, because grain has its own inherent hazards in storage, and certainly the personnel need to be knowledgeable about what those hazards are and how they need to address those to effect rescue.
David Hedrick says such training these days includes mobile grain bin engulfment simulators found in many parts of the country, like that offered through the University of Missouri Extension's Fire and Rescue Training Institute.
It's on a tractor-trailer unit so that we can take that trainer around to the local fire service throughout the state. Missouri being highly rural, and about 80% of the state's fire service is volunteer, and so we knew that we needed to bring that training in to them so that it was accessible as possible to meet their needs and their opportunity to attend training.
The one-day training involves students learning proper rescue techniques and use of equipment in the event of a grain bin entrapment, as well as different grain characteristics and how that impacts rescue attempts. Now, with many fire and EMT personnel from rural areas taking these types of courses, you would think they would have extensive knowledge of how grain bins work and safety procedures for themselves and victims in a rescue scenario. But as Hedrick's colleague at Extension, Kevin Zumwalt, points out,
many have no formal rescue training and some do have formal rescue training, but what we find that's consistent between both groups is that they are unfamiliar with specifics to grain bin rescue.
So that is why students learn firsthand what a victim experiences in a grain bin entrapment.
We do actually put individuals into the grain. We have controlled augers and safeguards into place to where we can run an auger and actually show the class member what actually happens when the person is sinking in the grain. We take them up to about their waist to show them that even just to the waist, it's very difficult to self-extricate.
Giving the student a better understanding so when they, as rescue personnel, must conduct a rescue, they know what to do to protect themselves and rescue the person trapped in the grain. I'm Rod Bain reporting for the U.S. Department of Agriculture in Washington, D.C.
One of the crops being looked at as the growing season comes to a midpoint is corn. USDA meteorologist Brett Rippey has the latest numbers.
We see now more than one-third of the U.S. corn mature by September 13th. The U.S. number is 35%. That is slightly behind the five-year average of 40%, but well ahead of last year's 25%.
As for the major Midwestern states,
leading the way is Illinois. 61% of the corn crop mature there. 53% is the five-year average.
As for the areas lagging, Iowa, Michigan, and Missouri are more than 10 points behind their five-year averages for full maturity.
Missouri at 54%, 12 points down. Iowa at 26% mature. That's well behind the average of 43%, and Michigan just 13%.
Meantime, harvest is well underway across the South, but just getting started in the southern Corn Belt. Nationally, it's at 5% as of September 13th. Corn condition, steady at 68%, good to excellent, and 10% very poor to poor. For USDA Radio, Susan Carter, Washington, D.C.
Harvest season is underway, and that means motorists should look out for slow-moving farm equipment as producers move from field to field or field to farmyard. Rod Bain with the U.S. Department of Agriculture has some helpful tips and what to look for during this busy harvest season.
Perhaps you are driving in a rush for work on a two-lane rural road when what seems all of a sudden you come upon a slow-moving piece of farm machinery in the same lane as you. You put on the brakes to avoid a rear-end collision.
Let's say the car is traveling 55 miles an hour and you're coming up on a vehicle, another slow-moving car that's going 45 miles an hour, and let's say you're about 400 feet away. You have 27 seconds to close that 400 feet. Well, now let's say that the car is traveling 55 miles an hour, but the vehicle in front of them is only traveling, let's say, 15 miles an hour. It only takes 7 seconds to close that same 400 feet. And even with today's faster farm equipment, it's still only about 13 seconds to close that same distance.
Mike Staten of Michigan State University Extension says in recent years, the number of collisions between farm equipment and motor vehicles on our nation's roadways has increased, with rear-end collisions being one of many factors connected to these types of accidents. Other factors include the terrain on the roadway and how that factors into visibility, the size of the piece of farm equipment, and the increase of traffic for both farm equipment and motor vehicles, as well as the distance each must travel to get to their destinations, such as from field to field or from home to workplace. Now, Staten first and foremost emphasizes both farmers and drivers can do their part to avoid these accidents. But what can you, the driver, do to prevent a collision with traveling farm equipment?
Look for flashing lights, try to identify farm equipment, be aware of this difference in closure time and react as soon as you can, and look for slow-moving vehicle signs on the back of the equipment. Should be about in the center of the piece of equipment, should be 3 to 5 feet off the ground, and it'll be a triangle that's going to have red margins and an orange center, very universal symbol that it's a slow-moving piece of equipment.
In addition, Staten advises motorists to be patient if they find themselves traveling behind a slow-moving piece of farm equipment.
The tractor operator will know that you're there and will try to pull over when they can. The trouble is some of our shoulders are soft or there might be obstacles and preventing them from pulling over. So just trust them to pull over when they can and then pass when it's safe.
And if your vehicle is following farm equipment, keep in mind that left-hand turns will be common as this equipment turns into a driveway or farm field.
The motorist that's following them won't be aware of that, so they will run into the tractor as it's turning. So just be aware of that. Look for farm buildings on the left side of the road. Look for the equipment to be slowing down a little bit. Of course, always look for signals,
either in the way of flashing warning lights or hand signals. I'm Rod Bain reporting for the U.S. Department of Agriculture in Washington, D.C.